It Is I Who Ought to Thank You by Li Jiatong, translated by Daniel J. Bauer. A gentleman named Chen, who had been a chairman of the board, passed away last week at our hospital. His memorial service has already been conducted. Yesterday, however, I received a telephone call from his son. He said he had a few questions for me, and we made an appointment to meet at a coffee shop. Chairman Chen was a patient at our hospital for 2 months. This is the type of person who certainly kept a notebook, and important matters were sure to be jotted down in those pages. When Mr. Chen's son and I met, he had me take a look at the elderly Chen's notebook. Most of the contents of that notebook involved details of decisions Mr. Chen had made for his professional duties and business dealings. He left a record of directives on how to handle his company's holdings, how to issue debentures, and so on. Written during the final month of Mr. Chen's life, however, were several sentences that really made you stop and wonder. In red ink, his son had drawn check marks beside some of the phrases. I want to, now I can finally see, it is I who ought to thank you. If he wants to come, who can possibly stop him? No doubt about it. Words like that will ring bells like clanging gongs and make a fellow's head spin in circles. But slowly I became aware of a few incidents that had occurred during those last days of his. Some mysterious things did happen. Chairman Chen stayed in a very particular part of our hospital, in what we might call the VIP suite, which actually included several rooms. In addition to a bedroom, this special medical suite included a meeting room and an office with state-of-the-art communication facilities. There were telephones, a fax machine, a computer with internet access, anything a special patient might require. From the beginning, we only made the VIP medical suite available to patients of a particular economic status. Now, it stands to reason that patients of a particular economic status deserve special privacy rights. So the VIP suite had a private entrance and a security guard by the door 24 hours a day. There was no way in the world anyone could just walk in there out of the blue. Chairman Chen was suffering from cancer, and it was in its last stages. He was usually very quiet. He knew what would inevitably happen. He asked only that it would be as painless as possible. As was natural for a man of his stature, someone who had been so incredibly successful, to ask him to drop all contact with the business of his company was impossible. Actually, he was still making the most important policy decisions right up until the end. But day by day, he became thinner and thinner, and the affairs he administered eventually became fewer and fewer. One day, he told me of a strange event. He said that the night before, he had seen a man go by his room, pushing a hand cart. The cart was full of clothing and sheets, and it seemed the man was delivering them to the laundry department. The man pushing the cart was extremely thin, much smaller than Mr. Chen, and on top of that, he was crippled. One by one, every step he took was difficult. What a coincidence! The cart tumbled over right in the doorway of his room. This tiny and physically challenged worker didn't stand a chance getting that cart back upright again. He simply stood in the doorway of the suite and looked at Chairman Chen with a pleading expression on his face. Although he did not say a word, Mr. Chen grasped his meaning. The man was virtually asking, "Do you want to help me?" I asked Chairman Chen how he replied, and he said his answer at that moment was, "I want to." Chairman Chen's health was extremely precarious. I knew that for a fact. How could he ever find the strength to set that cart upright? He said afterwards it seemed strange to him too, how he was strong enough, but he was actually able to do it. Indeed, since he noticed how hard it had been for the worker to push the cart, Mr. Chen pushed it all the way to the end of the corridor for him. Now I finally knew this chairman of a great company could not possibly have cooked up a silly story to make a fool of me. What would be the point of lying to me? But I thought this entire affair was certainly weird. Our hospital would probably never have had a physically challenged person do this type of work. Pushing a cart? It was far too dangerous. Why, if anything ran amok, the law would jump all over us in court. At the time, I didn't want to pay the matter any more mind. I simply figured that Mr. Chen was a very ill man, and his mind was playing tricks on him. About 2 or so weeks passed by, and then, again, Mr. Chen brought up this worker, so thin, so handicapped. He told me the worker had appeared again during the night. He surely helped him push that cart again. This time, I really became anxious, because this entire situation was simply not possible. I had personally checked with the people in charge of security, and they assured me no one had managed to slip into the building there in the middle of the night. Neither had they seen anyone resembling the worker with a problem walking like that. I consulted the finance and personnel departments, who told me the hospital could not use a handicapped person for any job involving carts to push all over the place. It was the same with the question of retrieving laundry from the VIP suite section of the hospital. Workers did that during regular day shift hours. Patients needed their sleep at night. How could hospital staff possibly be banging around at that hour to pick up laundry? I even told Chairman Chen's story to the director of the hospital. It was his estimation that the entire affair had happened in Mr. Chen's imagination. It was beyond the realm of the possible for that worker to exist. Chairman Chen, however, was absolutely earnest about it all. I noticed that a change had come over him. He had previously appeared quite unhappy about his illness and never seemed quite able to accept it. Recently, however, his attitude had turned a corner. One day, he even went so far as to make an appointment with me to have a talk. He said in the past he had never seen this type of unfortunate person. His own children were tall, and they enjoyed perfect health. The same was true of the children of his friends. This was the first time he ever saw someone so thin. What particularly bothered him was the fact that this man had trouble walking, was handicapped. Chairman Chen told me he had awakened early one morning, and the thought suddenly hit him that this type of unfortunate person surely had existed long ago. It was just that his world didn't have anyone like that. Perhaps he had seen people like this on the street, but he hardly ever cared about them. He had seen them, but been blind. This time, he finally had eyes to see. Mr. Chen was the type of person who, when he did anything, always did it all the way. In a short time, people working for him gathered photographs and related information on the internet about a wide variety of people who were in all sorts of situations of suffering. He let me study this material he gleaned from internet sources, and full of feeling, told me in all his 70 years of life, he had never imagined there were so many people suffering in the world. Later, I discovered that the members of his staff working at his command were supremely capable people. If he gave the word that such and such was to be done, you could bank on it. They took care of it and produced amazing results. The photographs he had collected were taken by expert photographers and were not available on the internet. Members from international branch offices had all been searching for such photos these days. Everyone was baffled why the big boss wanted all this material. One day, Mr. Chen said from that time on, he probably would not see the pitiful worker any longer. After so many days, the worker had not said a word, but on that night, when he pushed the laundry cart to the end of the hallway, he said to Mr. Chen, "You may go now in peace." I asked Chairman Chen if the worker had said any word of thanks to him. He turned my words around and said it was he who should thank the worker. His previous life had been so good, he had never had contact with poor people, nor really with anyone who truly suffered. For once in his life, this time, he had personally seen such a person. It had opened his eyes. So the situation came to that point. I felt I had to set the facts straight. I told Chairman Chen that the hospital did not have any handicapped worker, and that the security team had never seen him entering the hospital. Chairman Chen was nonplussed by my words. His comment was, if he really wanted to come, security could never stop him. 2 days later, I was invited to participate as a witness in the signing of Chairman Chen's will. He had directed a lawyer from a firm to handle the responsibilities. He wanted 90% of his property to be converted to cash reserves in 10 years. The cash was then to be freely distributed to poor people. Although his will was quite brief, it was printed bilingually, with Chinese on one side of the page and English on the other. The attorney was well versed in the intricacies of international law. The specific beneficiaries of the donations he required were to be determined by a committee, formed by some local and international celebrities of sterling reputation as the invitation of the law firm. After Chairman Chen signed the will, he shook hands with everyone present one by one. His health looked very frail, and he didn't have much to say. When he shook hands with me, however, he said, "You know, I can go peacefully now." That same day, in the company of his family, Chairman Chen left his world in peace. After I told my story in great detail to Mr. Chen's son, he told me he now understood what the words meant. He said all through his life, his father had been considered a highly accomplished person in the eyes of society. In addition, however, he also had a great soft spot in his heart, a well of compassion inside of him. He just never had the opportunity to let it come out. He had never imagined that before he breathed his last, such an encounter would come along his path so that at the very end, he could change into another person. I decided to ask Mr. Chen's son a question that was hard to answer. My question was, do you think that handicapped worker ever existed? I was startled by his reply, which came without a second's hesitation. He absolutely existed. Sure he did. Only when you care about people like that can you see them. Chairman Chen's curious affair had come to an end. As for me, I am finished with chasing after an answer about that worker. My only hope is that I too may have the eyes to see that person.